Hi, how are ya? Super Dude here with a shorter video for a weirder sort of game that I think some people may find a lot of love in, so let me get to my sales pitch. What is it about Resident Evil 4 that people found so fun? The heavier emphasis on action was a standout feature, allowing for more freedom than ever before, but it was still restricted by tank controls. Pairing this with the much more aggressive and numerous enemies gave you a real sense of power when you were taking out the numerous hordes, but the tank controls could still gum up the works in panic situations, carefully blending the horror and action into one cohesive whole. And yeah, I know that this is the remake you're seeing. It's easier to get HD capture for the remake than the original, so pretend with me. The gunplay was also very fluid compared to the older Resident Evil titles, actually requiring you to aim your gun instead of gesture it in the direction of zombies. It asked more of you, and by the middle portion of the game it was asking a lot more. It wasn't just about resource and inventory management, it was about hitting heads, roundhouse kicking dudes, sometimes being asked to perform impromptu QuickTime events that always killed me the first time they came up. I hate QTEs. But let's back up for a moment. When we think about RE4, these are a lot of the factors that took the world by storm, but that first thing I glossed over, the resource and inventory management, that was still very much a part of the picture for Resident Evil 4. Items take up a different amount of space in a Tetris-like briefcase. If you want to bring something along for the ride, you gotta make space for it. And this is easily a third of the game. Now, the remake has changed a lot of those aspects to be more streamlined. Pulling out a grenade or gun only requires a shortcut key, which drastically reduces the amount of time spent ruminating over your pack, but it is still very much a thing. The push and pull between guns, ammo, health, and the random bits and bobs used for crafting in the new version define how you approach the next engagement, and you can find yourself really hurting if you don't pay attention to your resource usage. Find a new mod to raise the effectiveness of your gun? You need to make space. Bought yourself a sick RPG to one-shot an incoming boss? You need to make space. Even outside of these key purchasing moments, you'll still want to look over your loot and clean up the place so you don't waste time looking for what you need in firefights. There's this feeling I get when everything's clean and in its place, which is very similar to the feeling I get when I clear a full row in Tetris, an extreme sense of satisfaction at things going exactly where they belong. It is that feeling that I am getting at here. Do you find yourself captivated by the joys of video game organization? Do you enjoy the meticulousness of everything having its place and everything being neat and organized? Well, what if I told you there is a game, a roguelite no less, that makes this inventory management the linchpin of every system in the game? Today, I want to tell you about Backpack Hero, an inventory management roguelite that is not short but definitely sweet that came out late last year that I've been dumping huge amounts of my time into as of recent. In Backpack Hero, you play as this cute little pack rat called Purse as she descends into the dungeons near her hometown. At the start of the game, she happens upon a magical backpack, whose inventory space can expand in limitless directions, allowing her to carry far more loot than she could previously imagine. She decides to use this newfound boon to revitalize the town, as well as plunge deeper into the depths of the dungeon below in the hopes of finding her long-lost mother. It reminds me a lot of Crypto the Necrodancer in that way. The story is pretty basic and melodramatic, and mostly just exists as an excuse for you to be doing the things you're doing. Though there are some significant differences in Backpack Hero's story from Crypt that I'll get into later. Dungeon crawling is point and click in nature. You're given a set of options to choose from loot to a slew of different merchants to fights. Navigating isn't the point here, it is the fighting. Enemies operate under much the same system as Slay the Spire. You can see their intent and know exactly how much damage and defenses they're going to set up when their turn transpires. No surprises there. The enemy intent is like a puzzle for you to solve using the gear you have stored away in your pack, so let's get to that. Your pack can hold a great assortment of junk that can be used to perform various actions. You can find weaponry, shields, armor, consumables, artifacts, trinkets, literal housing structures. The list goes on, and there's a great deal of variance to what types of builds you can get up to. But at the start of any run, you'll likely just have these 3 items: a wooden sword, the wooden shield, and some food. The food will give you 2 extra actions on top of your usual 3, and the sword and shield do as you'd expect. You block incoming hits and strike the enemy when it's safe to do so, and maybe eat some extra food to give yourself the extra energy you need to finish them off quickly. Immediately after this defeat, you'll level up, which allows you to increase the space on the inside of your bag in whatever direction you want, and immediately after, grab some loot from the fallen enemies. Every single time you defeat foes, you will have a smorgasbord of junk to sift through, so you will quickly hit inventory limit, meaning you have to get choosy with what you wish to bring along. Let's return to the Slay the Spire comparison for a moment. In Slay the Spire, your deck is an important thing to consider, as you want your actions to be versatile, but also not bloated with random junk that'll get in the way of your character's strengths. Backpack Hero is much the same way, but on top of considering what actions you can perform through the gear you're holding, you must also consider the shape of your pack, because the shape will determine what builds you will excel at. As an example, this gem roll will give any weapon that's adjacent to it +1 damage, but the gem floats, meaning it'll always go to the very top of your pack. This will affect how you want to place weapons around it in your pack, and therefore how you structure everything else. Bows need to be in the same row as their arrows, and the arrows deal more damage for each empty space to the right.
Kind of like it's traveling, it's like it's being fired, guys.
So you're sacrificing pack utility for damage with the bow run. Certain armors modify adjacent armor with extra shield gain passively. Helmets are more effective in top row, boots more effective in bottom. Some items want nothing around them for their effects to work, some become stronger when placed with more of its kind, like the bricks or fish sword. Almost everything interacts with something else to constantly change up how you organize your pack to best utilize your tools. You are constantly deprived of space, which makes each decision for what you need, what you want, and what you'll keep for later more and more painful as you near the end. At the end of the area, you fight your final boss, get your reward for completing the dungeon, if it'll fit in your bag. You see how painful this can get? And then take off for home to show off your gains to the townsfolk. The town is what makes Backpack Hero turn from a roguelike into a roguelite, where your loot can be used to revitalize the damaged town. Turns out your pack can also store entire buildings inside of it, which allows you to reorganize the town and build buildings far faster than any one rat could by paw. The first thing you'll build is a store, which just serves as a place to sell all of your stuff, which is turned into food, building materials, and treasure, your 3 town currencies for building further structures down the road. At first, your goal is to build houses for people to settle into, and if you're lucky enough to have a surplus of town currency, turn it into passive income structures to make your money work for you. These buildings are more effective when placed in certain locations. For example, the fishery is more efficient for each tile of water it is placed near. So not unlike your backpack, your town needs to be properly organized to squeeze the most out of it. Real quick, let's take a pause. You may have noticed that Backpack Hero is kind of a mechanically rich game. It takes the idea of inventory management and really runs away with it. But perhaps that ain't your speed. Maybe you want just to organize stuff in a cozy environment, something relaxed and doesn't really ask too much of you. Well, for that, I'd recommend Unpacking. I don't have much to say about Unpacking because there isn't much to say. It's a very simple design, but it's cute and sweet, and it does a great job evoking the experience of, well, unpacking. I recommend playing this game with people because you can learn a lot about a person by seeing their thought process on how they organize their life. Plus, the storytelling on display is subtle but evocative. It's great. It's like the cozy version of this inventory management idea. So, try it out. All right, back to the video. This is the initial loop. Go to town, dump your stuff at the store to turn it into materials, build what you can with those materials, go to the dungeon, rinse, repeat. Around run 2 or 3, you'll start receiving missions from your townsfolk, which serve as both tutorials to other item types and challenge runs to spice up your gameplay. This is how you'll first come into contact with archery builds, shiv builds, magic builds, you name it. Oftentimes, your reward for completing these tutorial runs is unblocking the very gear you just used, rewarding you for your proficiency by giving you those items to experiment with in later runs. In the more challenge run style missions, you'll instead receive one of these, a Lost Spark. Lost Sparks are essentially your story progression items. You'll need a certain amount of these to unlock keys to further depths of the dungeon, turning your initially very easy dungeon crawl into something with a bit more bite to it. Returning to town, you'll find more and more critters moving in as you continue to build, some being quest givers, others merchants or artisans that can help you build new structures or research new gear, and here is where the game truly blossoms. So, at first, your reward for finding new gear is just selling it in town, right? With the construction of the smithy, your blacksmith can use the items found in the dungeon to create new items, further spicing up the possibilities for later dungeon runs. Sometimes the requirements are as simple as uncommon weapon. Sometimes they want something very specific. Or perhaps they just want some town materials. Basically everything is up for grabs in search for more items, and it doesn't stop at just the smithy. The library, the magic mushroom, the barracks, the fletchers, the jewelers, for each type of item that can be found below, there is a building that deals in crafting new trinkets and tools for you to utilize in that category. This here is the actual strength of the game. The researching of new items, building up your town, the dungeons below, all of it feeds back into the central mechanic of what's in your pack. Let's say there's this hypothetical really awesome weapon that you would like to try out, but it requires you to find this other item somewhere in the dungeon. Maybe that's not even a good item, but you're grabbing it below and holding onto it to hopefully survive the trek and make it home with your goods in hand. When that new weapon is forged, you hurriedly descend into the depths again in the hopes of finding that weapon and giving it a good swing. It's the loop of finding items, using them in fights, and applying them in town to find more items, and using those in the dungeon and in town over and over forever. One could call it a feedback loop. The town does a fantastic job facilitating your exploration, as well as encouraging build diversity by forcing you to grab other types of gear than what you're most comfortable with. This whole game is really well designed around its focus of inventory management, and it's for that reason that I recommend everybody try it out. That's the Cliff Notes version. From here, I will get a little bit more into the weeds, as well as saying some things I don't like and some things that I really enjoy, but none of it's important for you to know going in, unless it is, I guess. I don't know. Keep watching if you want to, don't if you don't. The town buildings have this efficiency meter that can be increased by placing certain types of buildings near it. It's a system for encouraging your town to be decorated. Place religious decorations near the church, and the church will become more efficient. Reminds me of Cult of the Lamb in that way. Issue is, I don't care a lick for decoration. Never have. It ain't my thing. What I'm trying to say is, I ignored this system entirely. But it is for that reason that I am mentioning it, because I appreciate that the building starts at 100% efficiency, and goes even higher if you use the system, rather than, say, starting at 50% efficiency and needing to use decorations to become as useful as it implies on the tin. That simple numerical difference changes the mechanic from an implied mandatory one to an encouraging one, rewarding those who want to make their town pretty, while not punishing those who don't care, such as myself. But let's say this town bullshit isn't your speed. Earlier I mentioned that this game's story is a lot like Crypt the Necrodancers, serious and melodramatic, but overall easy to sidestep for the gameplay. Well, I was kind of lying. What I said was more so the case for Crypt, what with your ability to skip every cutscene, but Backpack Hero's story is a lot more pervasive. Characters talk to you, there are lore documents to find and learn about the world and why you're fighting this fight, and you have decisions to make during dialogue that means you can't really just mash through it. Overall, Backpack Hero wants you to engage with its story, which if I'm being perfectly honest with you, I didn't care about it. It just didn't grab me. So let's say you don't care about the story, or even further, don't care for these progression mechanics at all. Well, back during Backpack's beta period, the only thing there was to play was the dungeon crawl. No unlocks, no town building, just non-stop rogue-like fights. If you find yourself jonesing for that more classical rogue experience, Quick Start Game is your way to go. Very accommodating to those hardcore roguelike fans out there who don't want to worry about plot or progression and just want to get into the mechanics. Speaking of the hardcore fans, if you are pretty good at this sort of game already, you may find the early game to be pretty easy, but I encourage you to push through it. While this begins very simple, using lost sparks on keys reveals alternate paths through the dungeon as well as further depths to delve that really change up the aesthetics, music, and combat. And it was only very recently, while I was editing this video, that I beat it for the first time, so it does get quite challenging for those looking for that in their rogues. And all this is before considering the other characters you can try out, by the way. There are 5 characters total in the game, with many more in development, that are pretty different from each other in terms of playstyle. Percy's your starting character, with all the other unlockable through playing the story. As you can see, I have unlocked every character except for one of them, but let's get into why I might be missing that one, shall we? In order to unlock that second character, you need to give a very specific NPC a very specific item. An item that only spawns once and will not come back if you manage to destroy it through other means. But unlike most key items in the game, this one can be destroyed, which means if you accidentally get rid of it, you're out of that character. I will go ahead and let you know that this is a game-breaking glitch. This is the second character you're supposed to get a hold of, and if you want to see the end of the game, you need to have access to every character. So, roughly within the first 3 hours of the game, you're going to run into this, and if you destroy that item, it's gone. This save is no longer valid. It's all for naught. I'm sure there will be a patch for this eventually. It's a pretty egregious mistake, so it makes sense, but I'm just letting you know, when you have this item, hold on to it for dear life, because losing it is the difference between beating the game and bricking your save. No matter what though, you always have access to all of them through the Quick Start Game feature, so I can still describe that last one to you. And technically this is all spoilers for the story, I guess, but if you're quick starting, then it doesn't matter. Now, before we start, remember that inventory management is the star of the show for Backpack Hero. With this in mind, we must consider how we make each character distinct. We should give them alternative items and abilities, sure, like any roguelike, but if we don't also change how they manage their inventory, could we really consider this an inventory management game? Jaspel, the developer of Backpack Hero, seems to agree with my assertion. So they changed the inventory system for each and every character, sometimes a little bit, sometimes a lot bit, shaking up not just how they engage with enemies, but how they store their gear. For a brief recap of our default with Purse, she finds items, she uses items. When she upgrades her pack, she can pick any square along the sides of her current play space, picking somewhere between 3 to 4 slots per level up. Simple and clean is the way that you're making me feel tonight. Satchel is a birdie who gains a new status type for dealing with enemies, Charm. Charm is a stackable effect that causes the enemy to join your side when their charm passes their current health value, adding a new method of engagement to your arsenal. This makes spawner bosses in particular trivial compared to Purse, who has to sprint to hopefully kill the spawner boss before the adds Drowner. The pack begins in a much different state than Purse's. The possibility space for how you can expand is fully visible, but not accessible. Upon level up, you get a choice between one of 2 Tetronimos to place anywhere in this space. If you're used to using Purse, you may be wondering why you'd want to make other loot pockets. Wouldn't that make it hard to store large items? Sure, but Satchel has access to certain items that take advantage of different pockets, like these shivs growing stronger if they're used in different pockets, and this tuner that increases the charm for instruments in other pockets. All in all, Satchel is a strong character that isn't too weird compared to Purse in terms of item use, but with a wildly different inventory mechanic. I will go ahead and say up front that I'm bad at using Tote. Tote's items are wood carvings that you draw a random assortment of on your turn and play into your pack to put into effect. Tote's as close as this game gets to a typical deck builder in terms of combat mechanics, but the way they differ is with their discard mechanics. Most carvings have an effect on play, but some only do something when discarded. Some items you want to sit in your pack for as long as possible, while others are only there for their play effect and would be better to get rid of. Issue though, when you discard, you empty every carving from your pack, so knowing when to hold them and when to fold them is essential to good play, something I'm not good at. Her inventory upgrades work exactly the same as Purse, but that's probably for the best, seeing as her combat is so distinct compared to the others. Pochette's inventory management is much the same as Purse's, but her combat mechanic doubles as her inventory management distinction. Pochette has pets that she can spawn in to fight with her, capable of tanking hits or buffing each other or Pochette herself. Each pet has their own inventory space where they can store treats which can modify or add effects on spawn or defeat. If your pet dies though, resummoning them brings them back with only 1 HP, and it's not easy to find healing items for your little buds. Pochette's gameplay is much like an RPG party, with tanks, buffers, frontliners, and your highly customizable Pochette changing positions, giving status effects, and using every advantage to push to victory. Pochette's inventory management change is subtle, but the combat style is wildly different compared to anything else on offer. The final character for now is the robot CR8, or Crate. To be succinct, Crate's combat is completely nuts. Crate has this heart module that shoots all of your energy out as a single charge, which flies out of the blue tube. To use items, the charge must pass over them, and once the amount of energy in the charge hits 0, it fizzles out. It's just a different way of using your energy, where you must direct your charge towards the items you want to hit. The issue is, reorganizing your bag typically takes 3 energy, a very costly strategy to change up your bag's shape. Luckily, CR8 has a microchip that lets them reorganize their bag for free once during combat, but that's only the one time, so the margin for error is still quite low for this character. You need to have a solid strategy for dealing with any enemy that comes your way, and also handle any other contingencies, with only 2 real chances to pull that off. On a level up, Crate adds a Tetronimo to the side of the pack, further expanding the space where charges may fly. Crate is a really odd one. It works like nothing else in the entire game in terms of actually using your items, and it takes a little bit of rewiring personally before you're going to be able to figure out how to use them effectively. But trust me, I have now beaten the game twice as Crate, and they're easily my favorite character by far at this point. I love them to death, and they are the last one to unlock. You really should just rush to get Crate. They rule. As you can see, the way that these critters differentiate themselves from standard combat decisions to how they organize their inventory are so diverse that it kind of boggles my mind. The creativity on display by Jaspel and crew is amazing, and purely for the diversity of mechanics and how cleverly they made inventory management the central tenet of the game, I think you owe it to yourself to check this out if you're a fan of roguelikes, or that satisfying feeling of stuffing junk in your bag in the perfect way. The game frequently goes on sale and has a couple of different bundles if you'd like to grab multiple games at the same time, which includes Slay the Spire. I compared Backpack Hero to Slay the Spire multiple times in this video, which makes sense. It was an inspiration for Jaspel and crew on this, so if you had no clue what I was talking about in that regard earlier, this is the perfect way to try both. Overall, fantastic game with a really tight, cohesive design. It's just a little nugget of fresh inventory management focus. It's great, and I hope you try it out for yourself. I am Super Dude, thank you very much for watching.